Hey folks, question for you. What are you doing on July 8th? If the answer is nothing, you should come join us at Fusion. This is the learning conference hosted by D2L, and this year it's going to be taking place in Phoenix, Arizona. Robin Hammondtree and I are going to be hosting a pre-conference workshop on how to redesign your courses and programs in the age of AI. This will be a full day workshop, which means by the end of this, you are going to know everything as much as I do about AI, and you're going to be walking away of actually making real changes to your courses that day. So come nerd out with us. You can sign up by using the link in the show notes, and be sure to use the discount code RobinLuke150 to save $150 off your enrollment. So once again, this will be July 8th in Phoenix, Arizona for Fusion. And yes, it's gonna be hot because it's the summer and in Arizona, but good news, we're gonna have drinks and we're gonna be inside an air-conditioned room. So if you are planning on joining, be sure to use that discount code, and please feel free to let me know and give me a shout. That way I can make sure to look out for you, and can't wait to see you soon. All right, folks, let's start the show. Hello, learning nerds, and welcome on in to the nerdiest podcast you're going to hear today. I'm your host. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I'm the head of instructional design over at MIT X Pro, a lecturer at the University of Miami for the School of Education and Human Development, and someone who is pretty obsessed with instructional design. So I make a lot of content online, like this podcast, blog, YouTube, newsletter, books, and all these other different types of things, because my purpose is to help you when it comes to designing learning experiences and being able to teach them as well. And you can find all of the fabulous things that I have for you over at drlukehobson.com. And today, we're going to be sitting down with my friend Heather Burright. You might know her from Skill Masters Market LLC, or her very popular podcast in L&D called Learning for Good Podcast. In this episode, Heather and I take turns interviewing one another. So the show starts off with her asking about how I got into instructional design, and then I flip it back to her to hear more about how she got into the world of nonprofit instructional design, which there is a little bit of a theme here throughout this episode, talking about things from a higher education perspective and talking about our work from a nonprofit perspective too. And throughout the show, we talk about shifting away from that individual contributor work of being a content creator to now thinking more along the lines of a strategic partner. We talked a lot about different types of partnerships, talking with subject matter experts, talking a lot just about the human skills that are really needed to be an instructional designer nowadays. We also talked too about leadership, how to be able to invest in yourself to grow, whether you're an ID, you want to become a senior ID or a director someday. We talked a lot more too about everything from that type of a leadership perspective, as well as talking about building out your confidence, finding your voice inside of your organization. What does it take to be able to win someone over? How to get more people onto your side? A lot of people skills, truthfully, was in this episode. And last but not least was giving advice to you. If you want to be able to go and to grow inside of this space, we give a couple of types of tips for you to be able to follow along with. All right, so I'm not going to waste any more time. But once again, the show is going to jump right into me answering a question by Heather. So here we go. Here's my conversation with the one and the only Heather Burright.
Luke, I'm curious, what first pulled you into this work, this field of instructional design?
So I had no idea instructional design was a thing for the longest time. And it wasn't until I worked at Southern New Hampshire University many years ago, and I was just networking up a storm with a lot of people because I kept on seeing that we were hiring people like crazy. As every single week we were hiring 15 more people. And this is when SNHU was really growing at the time. And every single time that more people came into the door, it was like, what do you do? Because there's no way that we're going to be employing hundreds upon hundreds of people and you're all instructors or academic advisors. And that's what I was. I walked students through their courses, helped them to get oriented, answer any and all questions. And eventually I spoke with one person who, his name was Bruce, and he said that he was an instructional designer. And of course I was like, well, what the heck is that? And he's like, well, you'll walk your students through these different types of courses. Well, someone has to make those. And that's me. I work with faculty and we partner together to create them. And at first, I didn't believe him. like, night out. Like, that's not what you do. And it's like, no, like this is literally my job. And at that point in time of hearing, and I loved online learning. I've have different degrees in online learning as well, but I took as a student going into online education, and to hear that that was actually a career path was something I had no idea about. And that was back in 2013 or so when I first heard about that. And then eventually I kept on trying and trying and trying. And that's how I got into this instructional design world from the
Yeah.
space.
So have you always been in higher ed? Has that always been your home?
Besides one corporate job that I had, which was cold calling businesses and getting them to use a discount plan that they didn't know that they were on, which was very fascinating. Yeah, pretty much. My life has always been higher ed, which is also odd to say too, because my world has always been like higher ed in corporate learning, because I've always been in this like professional development sector, if you will. So it's an interesting blend of both worlds of higher ed. But yeah, that's where I've always been in for
Yeah,
things.
very cool.
Uh,
I have definitely met academic advisors who have transitioned to learning and development in some way in the nonprofit sector too. So
Yeah.
definitely cool to see that transition happen.
Yeah. What brought you into this work for everything?
Yeah, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. I went to college and spent a bunch of money on college tuition and changed my major like 5 times because I couldn't decide. Um, I actually finally landed on English because it's so open ended, right? I can do anything. And then, had a rude awakening that it was so open ended, couldn't really do anything. So I found a job as an assistant editor in a curriculum department. It was a government contractor. They were creating training for first responders all over the nation. And I was editing the curriculum. And so that's how I kind of fell into this world, like realized this world existed. And at the time, I was early 20s, and they were looking for people who would basically just volunteer to learn more about how people learn so that they could improve the curriculum. I'm young. I still have no idea what I really want to do with my life, obviously, after changing my major 5 times in college. And so I volunteered and I just kind of fell in love with it and have been doing it in some capacity ever since.
Isn't it always interesting that when you hear about how people learn and you think about like your college experience, that they basically did like the exact opposite of everything that like should work within
That
this
happens.
space?
That happens. Yes.
It's like, and it's not to poke fun at college and with instructors. And I know many wonderful instructors and professors, but thinking back to so much of my college experience where it's just like, nope, that was a bad idea. And that person just did a brain dump of information on me. And that person clearly made like this type of a chaotic learning environment with a lot of stress, like intentionally. And you're like, that's not the best way of learning things, you know?
Yeah. I mean, definitely as an English major, right? There was just a lot of lecture. And then
Yeah.
I guess there is the point of you get to a point after the lecture where you have to actually write about what you're learning. And so then you're synthesizing and you're producing something, and that's actually really valuable. But the majority of my classes were just lecture. You just write down everything the professor says.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I had a fine arts course that I took many years ago, and it was a 8 a.m. fine arts course. We were in the dark so that way the projector looked better. Great recipe for learning, by the way. And then I had one time where unfortunately I fell asleep in class. And then the next week she asked me to sit in the front row. And she's like, now, Luke, you can't fall asleep. And I was just like, well, maybe we shouldn't put me in the dark at 8 a.m. where clearly I'm not paying attention. And when the funny thing is, too, is that I loved art. Like, this wasn't like me finding art boring, but it was just 45 minutes to, no, I think this class is like an hour and a half, actually, where it was just, here is the title of the painting, here's about how it formed, and here's about the person. And it was just at me for an hour and a half. And meanwhile, I'm scribbling down notes to be like, okay, Van Gogh, and this is the, da, 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 and it's like, so yeah, good times. Very odd.
Thankfully, we have moved beyond projectors, dark rooms. We're still working on moving beyond the talking head instructor sometimes, but
We're trying.
we have
Yeah.
moved beyond dark rooms and projectors at the very least. So, Luke, was there a moment when you realized that you didn't want to just create and deliver training or content? You made this transition into instructional design within the higher ed world, right? Was there a point where you were like, I don't want to just design it, I don't want to just deliver it, I actually want to influence how organizations learn and grow? Because you, at some point, you made the transition into instructional design, but you teach instructional design. So
Yeah.
there's a little bit of a transition there from I'm not going to just do it myself. I'm going to help other people and influence how other people are influencing their organizations.
Yeah, it was interesting was actually coming out from the behind the scenes and then getting in front to talk about how the behind the scenes works, which is fascinating because people are like, what does instructional designers act like? What do you actually do? And then when you explain more about designing learning experiences and how to make them meaningful and relevant, to talking more about, of course, the objectives, the assessments, the activities, but really like, how do you make a learning experience cohesive and flow and try to be able to drive results and outcomes, which is the whole point of trying to be able to learn something, especially in my world of adult learning, where I want you to get better at your job. And we're going to be educating you on how these different types of things work. And the moment, as far as her thinking about, if now I am no longer the behind the scenes person where no one knows that I exist, to now like, well, what if I get in front of a stage? And now let's talk about that and share more about how learning works with people. And then in turn, how can you take this information and then bring it back into your classroom? Because I just don't want this to be like the fun Luke show. Look at him do this stuff. It's like, no, like I want you to be able to bring that back into your school. And that way it's something you can do immediately. And the first time being able to do these different types of workshops and then influencing people and showing them more about how these results can actually make a difference of things. And then when you hear back from people that they write to you after the workshop or after the training sessions or whatever it is, or after they've taken your course and 6 months go by and they reach back out to you saying like, hey, this actually made a difference. Like this truly did improve either my organization, me as a person. Now my students are improving because of what you taught me in that tip pipe, like of the trickle down effect of going from person to person to person. That really was this moment of like, wow, I'm actually making a difference. And it's not just me creating courses for the sake of creating courses. Like this is going somewhere at some point in time. So that's been huge to see. And then now to find myself in this instructor role and teaching people about how all this stuff works is something I never thought I'd be doing. But it's been awesome to be able to see that kind of carry on throughout the years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting that you had the data and they had the data to be able to come back and say, like, wow, we're seeing a difference here. I think that's something that as someone who works with nonprofits, data is always a little bit of a challenge. And so the fact that you get to see that and hear that from people is that's really meaningful.
And that's how you know it's working, which you don't. And I know you don't get that a lot of times. That it's rare, I would say, to be able to have an organization come back and say that like this then improved upon XYZ process, or to be able to actually have those stats and to be able to share them back with you. But anytime that you get something like that, you know that you're on track and you're not just, as you were saying, like you're not just like creating content for the sake of creating content. It's not just someone coming in and saying that like we need a hour-long workshop on blah and there's no rhyme or reason, and you're like, well, why, what led to this conversation, how did this happen, how do we get here, what's the problem we're actually trying to be able to solve, and then maybe I can figure this out. And instead it's just like, teach about this, and you're like, maybe. Let's talk more about that. Did you also have a moment of like trying to be able to evolve from, I guess, like that content creation mode into trying to think more along the lines of designing those meaningful learning experiences for your audience or different organizations?
Yeah, for sure. I think, I definitely had some element of that working for a government contractor, knowing that realistically, right, lives are at stake. Like the first responders are responding to situations that are inherently dangerous in some ways. And so um, there was always a bit of that. But I think when I got to the nonprofit sector, fast forward, I don't know, maybe 8 years or so, when I got to the nonprofit sector, I really started to think more about it. I think there was some complexity that existed in the organization that I was in. It was a national office, a federated organization. So the people that we trained were uh, basically employees of other organizations in some ways. Like that's probably too vague of a way to say it, but and a lot of federated organizations, there is a kind of a national office or a global office that's providing support and resources, but there's not a direct reporting line between those local chapters or local agencies. Those are their all their own 501(c)(3) that carry the same brand. And so when we would create training, we did not have a way of mandating it, and we did not have a way of always following the through line to see what would happen. because they weren't necessarily required to report things back to us, right? And we couldn't just pop in and see how it went and see the impacts of what we created. And so I started to think a lot more systemically, about how do we actually create change and how do we know that we're creating change and make this meaningful for people. And yes, part of that is like data collection, and we're going to do our best and we're going to measure as much as we're able to measure, and we're going to get creative about how we do that. And also, we need to design in a way that we know works. We need to be confident that what we create will actually make a difference. And so there was a little bit of both where it was like, okay, yes, like we need to measure it. We need to figure out how to do that, even in our complex structure. But we also have to be confident in what we're doing. And so I think it just started changing a little bit of what do I do? Why do I do what I do? And how do I communicate that to other people?
Did you find that after that you were trying to do more from like leading without power or influencing at the time? Maybe you didn't use the word influence, but trying to be able to influence about how these things had to change without maybe having like that full picture of everything. Cause like that's gotta be hard that you create a type of a training and then it goes out to all these different branches and then you kind of hope that they follow through.
Yeah.
You know, like that's tricky. It's really hard.
It is tricky for sure. Yeah, I mean, you very much have to partner with your stakeholders. You very much have to partner with the subject matter experts. There's no way you can know everything. You also really like I had to be in it with the audience. I had to run focus groups. I had to run interviews. I had to engage the subject matter experts to do things sometimes if I didn't have direct access to them. And so there is a lot of influence that goes into it. It's almost a change management approach to learning, but it also benefits your needs analysis a lot. So that's helpful. And you are a little bit more confident when you know I understand what their day to day experience looks like. I understand how this is going to be challenging for them. I understand what they're bringing to the table. And I also understand like what the difference will be when they do this. Like I understand what the impact is going to be. And so that it doesn't always happen when someone comes to you and just says, here's the content, go create the training. You might understand the content, but you don't understand the context. And because we had to use influence so much, there was a lot of opportunity to understand that context.
Does that, and I know I'm going to ask you a very broad question for things. Does that happen a lot in the nonprofit world? Or was this perhaps the organization or the times? Or like, is this a common occurrence? Because I do not know enough about the nonprofit world, which is why I'm asking.
Yeah, I would say yes. So a lot of the larger organizations are federated that I've run into. And so that structure in and of itself is pretty common. But even in the organizations that aren't, it's the nonprofit sector tends to be very collaborative and there's a lot of value driven, purpose driven work and people. And so the more you can connect why you're asking someone to do something to how it's going to help them or help the people they're serving, the better off you're going to be and getting that buy-in. So I think even in the structures that are not as complex, there's still this element of collaboration that exists where you want to engage them, you want to understand their day to day, and not just for the benefit of the training, but for the whole process, benefit of buy-in, benefit of influence, right? And at the end of the day, it makes a better solution as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know that for some of the different types of trainings that I've done and for developing different learning experiences are going to be served out to massive amounts of parts of organizations. One of the key parts was meeting with like the C suite level folks there to say that like we need to get your buy in too. Because if you don't know, which has happened to me before, that you create something and then you're creating it for the folks who are the actual like boots on the ground, the plant factory workers and such. When you come to find out that like the leadership team has no idea about what they're doing. And they're like, oh, good, they're still working. And you're like, wait a second, like we did all these things to try to be able to get this buy in and to try to be able to help with influencing this. And then come to find out that you're not aware of what we're doing. So therefore, you're not going to ask about it for performance evaluations, for talking about goals for the following year and KPIs and all those standard things. That is just, it's gone. It's right over your heads. So trying to be able to do that my experience has been a crazy whirlwind of times.
Yeah,
Sometimes it works, sometimes it's a real slog, and you're doing your best to be able to get through.
for sure. If I'm working on something for that's going to impact a program or a service, I am always thinking like, what did those folks need, and what do their managers need? Because just because we teach someone how to do something differently doesn't mean that their environment is conducive to them doing it differently. And a lot of times there are things in that you can't really control when you're not in that environment, but there are also things that you can influence. And the manager is often that place where you can have a lot of influence. But they have to be aware of what's changing, why it's changing, what the expectation is, how to know if the person is meeting expectations. And so I'm almost always designing duplicate not exactly duplicate, but duplicate, right? Because I want to make sure that the person implementing understands what it is and what they're trying to do, builds those skills. But I also need that people manager or that leader to understand it as well. So Luke, I am really curious. As instructional designers, as learning and development folks, we spend a lot of time helping other people grow, right? Helping other people learn and grow. But we often spend less time on ourselves and how we learn and grow. And this has been something that's been floating around for me for a bit. And so I'm curious to hear your response on this. How do you personally invest in your learning and development as a leader?
So what I try to really be able to do is to have types of challenging conversations with folks in my networks about things that are currently giving me a bit of pause or trouble. And I'll explain about my perspective on something, and then to have them try to either play like the devil's advocate or to bring up a different perspective that I didn't think about, and then to push back on my lines of thinking. That has helped me to grow more than anything else, because I want to be able to hear from someone who I deeply respect, but I feel very strongly about one side. And then when they can bring up something that perhaps I didn't think about it from a different type of an angle, and then to be able to try to make me kind of see the light for things, because I'm a pretty stubborn person. But if you do actually give me a compelling type of an argument, I'm always willing to listen. And there's been plenty of times where I've completely changed my mind going into something and thinking that we're going to be talking about something that's like of this, fearsome battle, and then at the end of it being like, oh, you know what? I was definitely in the wrong about that perspective. So having those types of difficult conversations with people that I trust and know has been the thing that has pushed me. And maybe that is my director. Maybe that's going to be someone who was like a former boss or a former mentor, or just someone who's in the learning and development space. There's actually been some conversations on the podcast where I've mentioned about something, and the guest was this like, yeah, I see your point, but have you thought about this? And they go into something. It's like, I haven't thought about it like that. And right now, of course, because of the world of higher education and instructional design, as soon as you say AI, it's just everyone is just like strong thoughts and feelings. And some are saying super pro, some are obviously against. And even seeing about how the like world right now is trying to like pit us against one another because they want the clickbait rage to talk about this from all these perspectives. But it does bring up some really interesting conversations around growth, especially if a new topic that it gets kind of lobbed into your world, and then saying, okay, what do I do with this? I can't ignore this. So we need to talk about that. And then that's when you get to be able to go to more conferences and events and workshops, and you do talk with other educators. And that's what's helped me to grow the most by far, has absolutely been those types of like intimate conversations where I knew that I could be transparent and vulnerable with things and not to be afraid of what they say or judge me or things of that nature. So I'm thankful that I built out that network of people who I can talk to and trust, and to go from there. So that's been my ticket. That's what I've been doing. Have you been doing anything similar of a sort, or am I insane for throwing myself in these
Yeah.
situations?
No, I think there's so much value in being in the room with people, 100%. I read a lot of books. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I focus a lot on growing myself as an individual. So like mindset and just like the general like being a good person, like leadership, those kinds of things. Like how do I get into a growth mindset? How do I grow as a person? And then I do that piece of it, right? I do also learn about learning, and I'm very much like in the camp of sometimes you just have to do it. And so getting that practice in and like figuring things out is another way that I learn, especially when it comes to learning things, learning things. And but I agree with you. Getting in the rooms with people is so valuable. Like I host a private community for nonprofit training professionals, and convening people is one of my absolute favorite things to do because anytime people are in the same room, they're learning something, right? We're engaging in conversation that you would not otherwise have. You're talking to people you would not otherwise talk to. And every time you walk away with a takeaway, you walk away with something new, some new insight, some new thing to try, some new tool you haven't heard of. Every time you're walking away with something. And I think that in and of itself is so valuable. So I agree.
I mean, learning is a social process. We
Yeah.
talked about that enough. Like, even though there's been all this research about communities of practice and everything, and we somehow just are like, ah, no, it's fine. Whenever I hear from people where they're concerned about this rapidly evolving technology and fearing that no one's going to talk to one another in the future, which maybe we might we might get some dystopian world of things, but overall, like, you don't learn unless if you're actually speaking about this with other people and interacting, experimenting, and all this sort. That I mean, even right now, I'm learning about the nonprofit space that you shared with me that I did not know about because simply I'm not in the nonprofit world. So I want to be able to hear more. And then, of course, from hearing from you, but I'm going to read more about this of nonprofit L&D in the future. And I'm sure it's going to be popping up more and speaking of more folks. And that's just something else I can then take away and try to be able to then use in the future for my audience of, hey, I don't talk about this as much, but if this is something that you need help with, then I will bring on more people to talk more about this and try to be able to find better ways of serving you. So that speaking piece is always is so huge that we don't, and if we do, I shouldn't say that, like we don't do that enough. But even when we do it enough, the other thing too is that it has to be positioned, and I'm sure you do this in your community of setting it up and framing it in the right way of being able to talk about stuff.
Yeah.
Where when you just put people in breakout rooms and you're like, go have fun. It's like, no, it's not. You got to be able to set the stage correctly and to make sure that they know that they can talk about this stuff and not feel that they have to just be kind of guarded or whatever. And that's fine. And if you feel that way, then fine. But hopefully it leads to better, deeper conversations. And I know that there was one conference that I went to. Have you ever been to Fusion before, the conference by D2L? So I went to one conference there. It was in Toronto a few years ago. And this one person who I met, he was talking deeply about the future of higher education and how politics are going to be getting involved, and certainly how we've seen things progress over the recent years. I was like, certainly you're definitely right about this. And it was interesting because even after the conference, he added me on LinkedIn and such, and he's like, we had a great conversation. Like, can we just keep talking? Like, it doesn't, you don't need to like set up an appointment with me. Just like, just keep this momentum going because we keep on talking about these things, and it's pushing me and it's challenging me, and I've been enjoying it. And if you can just find like that one person or two people within a community or a conference or whatever that you really do click with, it's just so helpful to always have. And I'll send messages to folks that I've met previously without any other like greeting of saying hi, but just being like, did you see this in the news? And just like firing it off at them. And I was like, what does this mean for us? And kind of a thing like that nature. So that's just so key for evolving and
Yeah.
growing for L&D people.
Yeah. That's so true. Now, you bring up something as you were talking, right? About LinkedIn, sharing your voice, that kind of thing. And we both have podcasts. We both post on LinkedIn, right? We're both constantly saying things. So, what helped you develop your confidence and your voice and being able to share your perspective like that?
Man, that's a good question. It's interesting about how if you had shared with me going back to even 10 years ago or even fewer in some cases about how I would be on this microphone all the time and talking about, I would have never believed you. Like, why? Especially too for now for some of the folks who now just see me in this light, and I'm sure for same thing of you where you're on YouTube, you're doing these different events, you're in public speaking, you're all these different types of things. And like, man, I hated public speaking growing up. I never liked any. I was such a nervous kid, and I so did not like the spotlight. And now to be like, no, I want to talk about this more. And really, I had and I'm not sure if you did you have like one friend who kept on pushing you, or a family member who was like, why don't you talk more? Like, why don't you do this more?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's really what was a part of this was that having people who are encouraging you to be able to do this. And the first thing that I can remember, at least from grad school, was taking a public speaking course and giving it literally everything that I had, because I got to see, I had a ruthless professor, and every person who went up and tried to be able to do this presentation, she just bombed them. And she was just like F's up everything. It was like all of his like red pen marks everywhere on their stuff. I was like, I can't be like that. I gotta try as hard as I can to do. And this new voice kind of came out from there because she pushed me that hard, and being able to try to be able to do that, and then now carry that over years later, still more public speaking courses and more different types of experiences, but getting pushed from there and then having more friends to say, you really need to speak more at conferences. You really need to try to be able to get your name out there more. And eventually that bled into podcasts and LinkedIn and all this other different stuff of trying to be able to do that because, yeah, like I found that passion and that spark to say, I want to share more about this. And the only way to be able to get your voice heard is to create that type of a platform. And then I relentlessly keep on doing it, and consistency, just like posting all the time and sharing all the time and meeting more people and being able to do that. So it's been odd. It's been an odd journey to be able to do this. As your entire like transformation, I guess I will call that as well, for trying to be able to get put into this spotlight that I don't know if you ever envisioned this for yourself or not, but it's just so fascinating to see for like.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have always loved a stage. Um, but I did not anticipate this by any means. I did not anticipate having a podcast, continuing a podcast for this long. I get recognized now when I go places and that, like, not in public. Nobody knows me in Chicago, but like if I go to a learning event, people are like, "Oh, you're the one with the podcast." And I'm like, "That's interesting. That's not at all what I was thinking." But yeah, when I started it, I had been guesting on podcasts for a year or two, and I think I got to a point where I'm like, I'm saying things, but there's not a single place where it's said. And so I wanted that single place. If I'm going to say things, then I want a single place where it can live. And so I started the podcast. I was encouraged to do it. And I knew when I started that I had a few kind of buckets of things that I wanted to talk about. And so everything kind of revolved around that. Definitely wanted to speak to nonprofit training folks. And so that was the intended audience. So I had some of that going when I started. But lately, I have been really thinking about what makes my work different and like, what am I doing differently than what someone else might do? And how is that impacting the way that I work? And as I've started to try to actually define those things, I feel like my voice has gotten stronger in the process. So before, I would say when I started my podcast, it was very like, I'm going to talk about instructional design, I'm going to talk about leadership development, and I'm going to talk about change management because those are things for me, they all intertwine. And so I knew that. And I was developing my voice as I was creating those episodes. But now, as I think about what actually makes someone successful in a learning and development role, I feel like I'm getting more clear in my opinions within each of those buckets, if that makes sense.
It makes plenty of sense. It's interesting about how you can be so confident too in one area, and then you'll have someone come in with a different perspective, and you're like, maybe I don't know as much as I thought. Tell me more for things, especially in learning and development. There's so many things, and I pinged my old boss about this the first time I learned that with Bloom's taxonomy, I always thought it was only the cognitive domain. And when I found out that there was other areas, I was like, why'd you never tell me this? And it was just like, Luke, at the time, we were only developing cognitive stuff. Like, we weren't talking about action. We weren't talking about emotion. We were just only talking about this, which is what everybody knows. And then to find out, I was like, man, I was so confident that I knew everything about Bloom's taxonomy. And I'm like, maybe I don't. And then that's when you're like, I never read the original book. I'm like, maybe I should pick that up. And like, you go down that rabbit hole to be able to find more things. So it's interesting to be able to see about how our confidence in what we do certainly takes shape and grows, and then and of course the other thing too is that, like, for you and I who both have a podcast and you throw it out there, when you are also wrong, and then hundreds of people get to hear you be wrong and it lives on the internet, and you're like, hey, I can admit that I was wrong or that I've changed my mind. That's
Yeah.
been something too that I've been trying to do more from that perspective of like, I was confidently wrong years ago, but I now feel this way instead. I acknowledge what I said previously. It could have been better. And here's the different direction, which, of course, especially for educators, like you should be growing.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be the same way all the single time, and you're not changing. Like you should be trying to be able to evolve and get better every single time. So if you don't acknowledge some of the past stuff, you're like, yeah, like I could have worded that a lot better. And you're like, okay, well now I will do this instead for going forwards. So
Yeah. It's
yeah,
a sign that you're learning and you're growing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to look back and say, huh, I don't necessarily agree with that anymore.
yes, well, especially too. Have you ever gone back and listened to your original podcast episodes?
No.
Yeah.
Why would I
So
do that?
I know. So I have
That sounds
for the
terrible.
sake of it. But the thing that always drives me kind of like not nuts because I'm glad, but when someone will say like, "Hey, Luke, I just listened to your episode with Katie Novak," and I was like, "Oh, cool, the first episode." Awesome. How'd that sound?
Right?
Like, but to still hear from them, they're like, it was really great. And you talked about X, Y, and Z and this helped me out. And I was like, yeah, but man, I sound horrendous. I don't know what it's doing. And I'm just like, I'm winging it. And clearly I can tell. And for others at the time who were commenting and sharing, saying, like, that this is helping me out. You see, like, the reviews come in from
Yeah.
people. You're like, okay, maybe I'm onto something. But man, you grow. You grow
Yeah.
over time and
Yeah.
you should change.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. So we talked a little bit about how we invest in our learning and development, how we're growing, how we're shaping our voice and our perspective. What advice do you have for someone, or what would you encourage someone to do if they're looking to grow in this way too? They're wanting to be more confident in their leadership, or have a stronger voice around learning, even if it's within their organization, right? Maybe they aren't necessarily looking to go post on LinkedIn every day or start a podcast, but they want to make sure they're showing up within their organization with a strong voice. What would you encourage them to start doing or stop doing?
Absolutely. So you do not need to have a podcast or to post on LinkedIn or go on YouTube. Like you absolutely do not need to be able to do this, especially if you're trying to grow within your own organization or something else. But you got to meet people and you need to be able to pop that bubble and to really just get out and network as much as possible. And I know that for some people, that network phrase is icky. And they're like, yeah, I don't like that. I was just like, but you don't understand, especially within your own organization. If you don't know everybody, then you're not going to be able to move things up the ladder because you don't know all the key players. And that's huge, especially appealing to different types of stakeholders where you find out that actually the person with the most power isn't the title that you're thinking of. And it's someone completely else who makes the decisions because they can influence so much. Like you got to meet those other people. So I love to be able to set up different types of coffee chats, 15, 30 minutes at a time, and being able to find people, even speaking with them if you're at like your in person organization too, where you're just chatting with them in the kitchen or just going up and like, I know that people don't do this because it's weird, but I do. I will just walk up to someone, I will pay them a compliment, and then I will introduce myself. And then that way, for going forwards, they will know who I am. And then that way, I can bring that back up again. And truly, that's kind of like 101 of how to make a friend is you say something nice about somebody. And then you say, oh, by the way, I'm Luke. I've seen you around the office a bunch of times. I never introduced myself, but I just wanted to be able to say hello. And the next time that I see that person where I'm like, hey, by the way, what do you actually do for your, like your day to day? Cause like, I just don't know. I heard you're in marketing. And then you come to find out more and more about them. And truly that's how I network with like many people in person. And then LinkedIn, it kind of the same way as far as you're talking about how you can comment on somebody's posts and saying that they made a great statement the other day, or in this case of yours, where I'd be like, I listened to your podcast episode the other day. This is incredibly helpful. Hey, by the way, do you have 5 minutes? Because I'd love to be able to figure out like how I can help you, or if I can pick your brain about something, or can I review something for you, or whatever the ask eventually does become. But it's more about starting those conversations and figuring out how to do so in a non-awkward way that will eventually build up your confidence, will build up your power within your organization. And it's just those very, very small steps. It's just, and going back to, I guess, like answering your question, is just go do something. Take the first step and do something. Don't overthink it. Don't just spend all your time like trying to read books and listening to other stuff where you're like, I don't know, like when's the right time to make the first move and to do it. Now is the right time. Go try it. Who cares? Like it's not going to hurt anything to send an email to someone within your organization who you're not close with, but you just simply want to be able to say hi. And you've been thinking about what they've been doing around the organization has been so impactful and it's been awesome, and that you love working with them. Great. It's, it's nothing tricky or hard to be able to do. I literally did this the other day with a very high up person at MIT the other day, where I just simply said about how, hey, you've been here so far for only a couple of months, but just wanted to say you've been making an impact. It's been great working with you. I'll catch you around the office next time around. And now when I see that person, they're like, hey, Luke. And I was like, you didn't know me like 3 months ago. Now you do. Like it's those small things that make a difference. What's your take on this? We're trying to be able to spread that type of confidence, influence, and such.
Yeah, I think there's so much value in exactly what you're saying, building those relationships, building the trust. And the more you can show up and show that you care about the other person, the better off you are. Like for you, that shows up as a compliment, that shows up as an introduction, that shows up as curiosity about what they're doing, what their role is, how they're contributing, right? Those are all ways that you're building trust with that person and building a relationship with that person. And honestly, everything we do in learning and development, probably in the world, but in learning and development is so dependent on the relationships that we have.
100%. I know of one person in particular, and he's been talking about like, why are people buying into this idea? It's a great idea. Like we should be talking about it. I've been come to be able to dive in further and peel back those layers and realizing I was like, no one knows you. You're screaming into the void because you haven't created those relationships yet. So why is someone going to be on your side if they're like, yeah, there's that random guy again with his megaphone shouting at me to adopt this new principle? And you're like, yeah, it doesn't work like that. Like you got to be able to truly make those connections. And they don't have to be like your best friend by any means, but to at least like be friendly enough that they know that you're not just after something and that you're trying to really make a meaningful change in the right direction for things is just that gets like kind of looked over. I feel like if you go back into if you ever took like a business school 101 again, it would definitely be like how to be able to get your coworkers to like you is like step one.
Wait a minute. I think there's a book like that.
Yeah, there's a
I
few
think
things
I
out
think
there.
somebody wrote it.
There's a few
How
things
to
out
win
there.
friends and influence people. I'm pretty
Yes.
when that one exists.
Yeah, it does. It does. But it's just like I trying to think back as far as we're talking about learning and development, where when you have like the different types of areas that we do have of obviously how learning works and project management and research and technology, but then of course there's that like little bubble of relationship management and people, and that kind of gets like this like glossed over the most, and especially when you talked about working as subject matter experts earlier, that you hear from people about how they have all these challenges working with their SMEs and they're not showing up on time and they're ignoring them or they're ghosting them or something else. And you're like, yeah, let's talk about it. Cause I bet what it is, it's a relationship issue. And then when you peel back those layers and when you find out that, oh, actually, there are other constraints as far as for with their deadlines and they have way too much going on and the budget is driving them insane or something else along those lines. And you realize that you're not the priority, but if you were higher up on their type of, favorable ladder, if you will, they would make it a point to tell that and to communicate it with you and not just to leave you in the dark. So it all goes back to people skills at the end of the day for what we do.
All
That's
roads
really
lead
that.
back to people
Yeah.
skills. Well, Luke, this has been such a fun conversation. I'm so glad that we got to do this together, and I can't wait for others to be able to listen in as well.
Hey, absolutely. My pleasure. And thank you so much for the invitation. And it's a great idea that you had of trying to have two L&D people come in and be like, this is chat
Yeah,
about things. So I love it. It's a great idea. So thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
yeah. Thank you.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you are not yet following Heather so far on LinkedIn, be sure to do so. I will put her handle down below inside of the show notes. She posts constantly some really good information, so definitely give her a follow. And of course, if you haven't listened to her podcast yet, the Learning for Good podcast, I would highly recommend to listen to that one too. And as a reminder, Fusion is happening soon. I'm going to be presenting at that conference, D2L's Fusion, which will be taking place in Phoenix, July 8th to the 10th. If you have not yet signed up for my workshop or going to be going into my presentation, which I think is on Friday, is my general session, be sure to sign up for Fusion today. And that way you can see me in person and definitely say hello. The other announcement that you might have seen on LinkedIn, if you have been following the chatter, is that I am giving a keynote for DevLearn Yes, like that DevLearn. I also don't know how this happened, but I'm thrilled to be doing so. First time that I'm going to be going to Vegas, which is a whole nother journey into everything as well. And that's going to be taking place in November, specifically happening November 4th through the 6th. And I believe that my session is November 5th for my keynote. And what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be doing a live podcast episode as the keynote. Really cool idea. Can't wait to be able to. It wasn't my idea, which is why I'm saying it was a cool idea. It was the event organizer's idea. So that one's going to be fun. Be sure to sign up for DevLearn if you have not yet done that one either. And as always, my friends, the usual things I say when I end these podcast episodes: give the show a 5-star rating wherever you are listening. A bunch of you just left some new 5-star reviews. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end of the episode. Of course, be a friend, tell a friend, and share the episode. And the very last thing that I have for you, as always, is to stay nerdy out there. And I'll talk to you next time.